Thank you. And good morning, friends. We come to you this morning to bring announcements, dedications, and songs. And just before we move into our program this morning, for those of you who are joining us by way of Facebook Live, our local TV station, WSST, experienced a cyber attack. And because of the cyber attack, it has caused some technical difficulties at the TV station so that we will not be able to bring our broadcast to you as we normally would on each Sunday morning. However, we are coming to you live from the J.W. Williams Funeral Home this morning as we will go forward with our program this morning. We do apologize for any inconvenience that this may have caused each of you, but we do hope, trust, and pray that your day may be brighter after viewing our program. Of course, we know that because we are on Facebook Live, that many of our friends who would normally join us by way of television might not necessarily be able to join us at this time. But if you are watching us on Facebook Live, we do encourage you to reach out to a friend and to share with them and let them know that we are here and we will be sharing our announcements with you this morning by this means. Again, we thank each of you for tuning in. We do apologize again for any inconveniences may have been causing you at this time, but we will go forward knowing that with the help of the Lord, all things are possible. We come to you this morning to bring announcements, dedications, and songs. We certainly hope that your day may be brighter after viewing our program. The family of Mrs. Annie K. Trussell Perry of Tampa, Florida, the family of Deacon Vernon David Conaway of Macon, Georgia, the family of Mr. Francis Singleton, better known as Mike, of Warwick, Georgia, would like to thank their many friends for the food, the flowers, the condolences, and all other expressions of sympathy and kindness shown to them during their hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. Mrs. Annie K. Trussell Perry, 78, of Tampa, Florida, died Saturday, January 22nd in Tampa, Florida. The committal service for Mrs. Annie K. Trussell Perry was held Wednesday, February 16, at the Pleasant Valley Church Cemetery in Pinehurst, Georgia. Deacon Vernon David Conaway, age 54, of Macon, Georgia, died Sunday, February 6 at Atrium Health Navicent in Macon, Georgia. The funeral service for Deacon Vernon David Conaway was held Friday, February 18th, on the grounds of his beloved New Mercy, New Beginnings, New Victory Ministries in Macon, Georgia. Bishop Eric S. McMillan officiated. Survivors include his loving and devoted wife of 15 years, Elder Matred M. Conaway of Macon, Georgia, his caring sons, Mr. J. Daniel Gatson II of Milford, Georgia, and Mr. Ashton M.G. Conaway of Lithonia, Georgia. One beloved and devoted daughter, Miss Christina M. Conaway of Lithonia, Georgia. His goddaughters, Miss Mayana Randolph of Hampton, Georgia, and Miss Nevia Johnson of Bristol, Pennsylvania. His beloved and devoted mother, Mother Shirley A. Conaway of Harrington, Georgia, his in-laws, Bishop Willie Hunter and Pastor Gail P. Hunter of Byron, Georgia, his brothers, Mr. Russell T. Conaway of Norfolk, Virginia, and Mr. W. Kashia Hunter III, and his wife, Mrs. Jewel Hunter of Lilburn, Georgia, his loving sisters, Miss Andrea Conaway of Stone Mountain, Georgia, and Miss Amanda G. Hunter of Loganville, Georgia, his loving aunts and uncles, Mrs. Linda Perry and her husband, Mr. Lawrence Perry of Chesapeake, Virginia, Miss Pamela Taylor, Miss Bertha Taylor, Miss Sabrina Taylor, and Miss Gail Reed and her husband, Mr. Linwood Reed, all of Millsboro, Delaware. Elder Elizabeth Johnson of Bristol, Pennsylvania, Miss Linda Moult and her husband, Mr. Calvin Moult of Brandon, Mississippi, Mrs. Ruth Barnes of Jackson, Mississippi, Mrs. Edna Williams and her husband, Mr. Dennis Williams of Cleveland, Ohio, Mr. Sonny Russ of Indiana, Mr. Bruce Taylor of Georgetown, Delaware, Mr. Elijah Hunter of Fort Walton, Florida, and Mr. Abraham Hunter and his wife, Mrs. Barbara Hunter of Douglasville, Georgia. His nieces and nephews, a host of loving cousins, church family, along with their dear friend and mentor, Elder Victor Morgan and his wife, Mrs. Carolyn Morgan of Bear, Delaware, survived Deacon Vernon David Conaway, age 54, of Macon, Georgia. Mr. Francis Singleton, better known as Mike, age 76, of 179 Henry Road, Warwick, Georgia, died Monday, February the 7th at the Phoebe Putney Memorial Hospital, North Campus in Albany, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Francis Singleton, better known as Mike, was held graveside Saturday, February 19th at the Mount Olive Church Cemetery in Warwick, Georgia. His pastor, Reverend Ivory J. Corbin, pastor of the Mount Moriah Baptist Church, officiated. Survivors include his loving and devoted wife, Ms. Gertrude Thomas Singleton of Warwick, Georgia, his loving and devoted children, Mrs. Tracy Peterson and her husband, Mr. Greg Peterson of Vienna, Georgia, Mrs. Cecilia Singleton and her husband, Mr. Aldred Singleton of Cordele, Georgia, Miss Sonia Jones of Atlanta, Georgia, Mr. Curtis Jones and Mr. Charles Jones, both of Warwick, Georgia, and Mr. Michael Singleton and his wife, Miss Teneria Singleton of Albany, Georgia. His beloved stepchildren, Ms. Veronica Mincy and Ms. Monica Mincy, both of Warwick, Georgia, Mr. Christopher Mincy of Greenville, South Carolina, Mrs. Danielle Bird and her husband, Mr. Eugene Bird of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Eddie Hicks, Mr. Clovis Hicks, Mr. Elbert Smith, Mr. Elvis Smith, Mr. Daniel Hicks, Ms. LaShawn Hicks, and Mr. Reginald Smith. 25 grandchildren, 3 of whom he raised, Miss Kendallin Westbrook of Vienna, Georgia, Mr. Kyrie Talbert of Warwick, Georgia, and Mr. Jakari Felton of Oglethorpe, Georgia. 20 great-grandchildren, his caring siblings, Miss Julia May Hall and her husband, Mr. Johnny Hall, Mrs. Carrie Cooper, Mr. Samuel Cooper and his wife, Mrs. Wanda Faye Cooper, Mr. Jerry Cooper, and Mrs. Bertha Gordon and her husband, Mr. Errol Gordon, all of Moore Haven, Florida. Mr. Willie Lee Cooper and his wife, Miss Raquel Cooper of Tallahassee, Florida, Mrs. Mary Helen Simmons and her husband, Mr. Robert Simmons of Mississippi, and Mr. Willie J. Bryant of Warwick, Georgia. His in-laws, Ms. Gwen Mitchell, Ms. Willie Mae Thomas, Ms. Vicki Thomas, and Mr. Leon Thomas, all of Warwick, Georgia. Ms. Patricia Thomas and Ms. Thelma Battle, both of Cordele, Georgia. His godmother, Mother Willie Mae Walker of Warwick, Georgia. A host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many sorry friends survive. Mr. Francis Singleton, better known as Mike, age 76, of 179 Henry Road, Warwick, Georgia. Again, the family of Mrs. Annie K. Trussell Perry of Tampa, Florida, the family of Deacon Vernon David Conaway of Macon, Georgia, the family of Mr. Francis Singleton, better known as Mike of Warwick, Georgia, would like to thank all of their many friends for all of the many kindnesses shown to them during their hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. May God bless each of you is their prayer. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors, serving Cordele and Vienna, were in charge of these arrangements during the past week. And now, friends, it is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcements. Mrs. Connie Frances Deans Dixon, age 59, of 651 Stevens Street, Rochelle, Georgia, died Wednesday, February 16th at Atrium Navicent Health in Macon, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted husband, Mr. Robert Lee Dixon of Rochelle, Georgia, her loving and devoted children, Miss LaKiri Clark and her husband, Mr. Carone Clark of Rochelle, Georgia, Mr. Antoine Deans and his wife, Ms. Diane Deans of Tifton, Georgia, Mrs. Nikita Williams and her husband, Mr. Lenny Williams Sr. of Abbeville, Georgia, and Mr. Deontay LaGria of Rochelle, Georgia. 17 loving grandchildren, her loving and devoted mother, Mother Juanita Lawson Deans of Rochelle, Georgia, her loving sisters, Mrs. Shirley Favors and her husband, Mr. Sammy Favors of Quincy, Florida, Mrs. Melinda Griffin and her husband, Mr. William Griffin of Eastman, Georgia, Mrs. Sylvia Smith and her husband, Mr. Charles Smith, Mrs. Jane Deans, Miss Latasha Deans, and Miss Robin Deans, all of Rochelle, Georgia. Her beloved brothers, Mr. Dwayne Deans Sr. of Rochelle, Georgia, and Mr. Stacy Deans of Tifton, Georgia. A loving great-grandmother, Mother Eleanor McBurrows of Waycross, Georgia. Her aunts and uncles, her father-in-law, Mr. Boise Dixon of Rochelle, Georgia, her sisters-in-law, Mrs. Arlene Dixon of Rochelle, Georgia, Mrs. Diane Johnson and her husband, Mr. Willie Johnson of Eastman, Georgia, her brother-in-law, Mr. Johnny Dixon, and his wife, Minister Danita Dixon of Rochelle, Georgia. A host of nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive Mrs. Connie Frances Deans Dixon, age 59, of 651 Stevens Street, Rochelle, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Connie Frances Deans Dixon will be held today, Sunday, February 20th, graveside at 1:00 p.m. at the New Travelers Home Church Cemetery in Abbeville, Georgia. Reverend Travis Johnson, pastor of the Piney Grove Baptist Church, will officiate. Beloved educator, Miss Carolyn Renee Brooks, age 49, of 1611 Oconee Circle, Cordele, Georgia, died Friday, February 18th at the Cancer Treatment Center of America in Noonan, Georgia. Ms. Brooks was a beloved educator and an assistant principal and CTAE advisor for the Dooley County High School. Survivors include her loving and devoted mother, Mrs. Carrie Dean Johnson Brooks of Cordele, Georgia. Her loving and devoted siblings, Mr. Reginald Johnson and his wife, Mrs. Angela Johnson, co-pastor Cynthia Johnson and her husband, Pastor David Johnson, Miss Ann Brooks, and Mr. Oscar Brooks Jr., all of Cordele, Georgia, and Miss Valencia Brooks of Savannah, Georgia. A very special great-nephew, Master Amari Walden of Cordele, Georgia. We do apologize because we are live this morning. A host of aunts and uncles, nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends to include her Dooley County School System family survive. Beloved educator, assistant principal, and CTAE advisor for the Dooley County High School, Ms. Carolyn Renee Brooks, age 49, of 1611 Oconee Circle, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Ms. Carolyn Renee Brooks will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mr. J.B. Crowder, age 51, of 217 South Depot Street, Pineview, Georgia, died Friday, February 18th at his residence. Survivors include his loving and devoted wife, Miss Tandalon Crowder of Pineview, Georgia, his beloved sons, Mr. Travis Collins and Mr. Jaquel Crowder, his loving daughter, Miss Aquanette Allen, his grandchildren, Amari Allen and Ramir Allen, his beloved brother, Mr. Patrick Milner, and his wife, Miss Gwendolyn Milner, his loving sister, Miss Felicia Cheese, a host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. J.B. Crowder, age 59, of 217 South Depot Street, Pineview, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. J.B. Crowther will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mr. Henry Lee Sims Jr., age 47, of 105 Ross Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Saturday, February 19th at the Piedmont Fayetteville Hospital in Fayetteville, Georgia. Survivors include his loving daughter, Ms. Gabrielle Daniels of Cordele, Georgia, his loving and caring sisters, Ms. Latasha Kelly and her husband, Mr. Joseph Kelly of Hampton, Georgia, and Ms. Yolanda Sims of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved and caring brothers, Mr. Sergio Sims and his wife, Ms. Cassandra Sims of Cordele, Georgia, and Mr. D'Angelo Sims of Warner Robins, Georgia. A host of aunts and uncles, many cousins, nieces and nephews, other relatives, and many sorry friends survive Mr. Henry Lee Sims Jr., age 47, of 105 Ross Street, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Henry Lee Sims Jr. will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mrs. Kimberly Shante Grant Sanon, age 47, of 515 Southeast 9th Street, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, died Thursday, January 27th at her residence. Survivors include her loving father, Mr. Curtis Grant of Atlanta, Georgia, her loving and devoted children, Ms. Nija Schaefers of Tallahassee, Florida, Mr. Pedro Sanon Jr., and Mr. Pazel Sanon of Los Angeles, California. 20 beloved siblings, a host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, aunts, uncles, other relatives, and many sorry friends, to include a special friend, Mr. Emmanuel Rollins of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and a special stepmother, Ms. Shirley Trimble of Savannah, Georgia. Survived Mrs. Kimberly Shante Grant Sanon, age 47, of 515 Southeast 9th Street, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The funeral service for Ms. Kimberly Shante Grant Sanon will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mr. Alonzo Mitchell Sr., age 66, of 511 North 4th Street, Cordele, Georgia, died early this morning, Sunday, February 20th, at his residence. Survivors include his loving and devoted wife, Mrs. Minnie Mitchell of Cordele, Georgia, his loving and devoted children, Miss Anicia Anderson, Mr. Antoine Mitchell, and Miss Misha Mitchell, his grandchildren, other relatives, and many, many sorry friends survive Mr. Alonzo Mitchell Sr., age 66, of 511 North 4th Street, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Alonzo Mitchell Sr. will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors, serving Cordele and Vienna, will be in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. Friends, as we stated to you earlier, we are coming to you live from the J.W. Williams Funeral Home this morning because of the cyber attack that has taken place at our local TV station. Well, again, we do apologize for those of you who might have tried to join us on our regular scheduled program on the television this morning, but we made every attempt that we possibly can to continue to go forward with our program this morning. We do want you to know that our program in its entirety, while we might not be able to do many of the things that we normally do, is dedicated to each of you who have tuned in this morning. We do thank you and we do appreciate it. And to each of our families, our most sincere prayers are offered to you during this time as well. As we continue this morning, we would like to take this opportunity just to share with you some of the announcements that we might have, while we might not be able to get around to many of them this morning. We remind you that the New Poplar Spring Baptist Church invites everyone to join them this morning at 9:45 a.m. for their worship service via conference call, and you may call them at 253-993-3761 for worship service. The Spring Hill Baptist Church extends to you a cordial invitation to worship with them each first and third Sunday, beginning at 11 o'clock a.m. Sister Mary Ann Lewis is the secretary. Deacon Edna Lewis is the chairman of deacons. Reverend Choice Cox Sr. is the pastor. Again, we also remind you that Christ Chapel Unadilla weekly food pantry is open every Saturday from 9 a.m. until 12 o'clock noon. Mrs. Jeanette Taylor is the pastor relief trainer. The Ebenezer Baptist Church extends to you a cordial invitation to worship with them during their worship service, and you may call them at 346-248-7799. The passcode is 228-890-9553. The worship service begins at 11 o'clock a.m. Deacon Morris McClendon is the chairman of deacons. Brother Samuel Stokes is the pastor. The Greater Mars Tabernacle Baptist Church extends to you a cordial invitation to worship with them today, Facebook Live. The worship service will begin at 9 o'clock a.m. Tuesday, midday prayer conference begins at 12 o'clock noon. Thursday, prayer meeting and Bible study is held at 6 o'clock p.m. The call-in number for the conference call is 229-329-7611. Mother Lucille Shazer, Church Mother. Deacon Arthur L. Parker, Chairman of Deacons. Dr. K.M. Williams is the pastor. You're invited to worship with the Emmanuel Missionary Baptist Church for their Pull-Up and Praise worship service held at 10 o'clock a.m. each Sunday morning. They are located at 1818 U.S. Highway 41 North here in Cordele, Georgia. Reverend Gregory Williams is the pastor. The St. King Baptist Church extends a cordial invitation for everyone to worship with them during their worship service. The Hour of Power worship service begins at 9 o'clock a.m. and you may join them for Sunday school as well. Reverend Woody Burnham is the pastor. You have a cordial invitation to worship with the Mount Zion First African Baptist Church. Their conference call schedule is as follows. Sunday morning worship service at 10 o'clock a.m. Prayer meeting on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 12 o'clock noon. Bible study is held each Wednesday at 5 o'clock p.m. The conference call-in number is 339-209-6419. Deacon Joe Wedges is the chairman of deacons. Dr. Dan James III is the pastor. You're cordially invited to worship with the Gethsemane Baptist Church today during their worship service via Zoom. You may join them at 10:30 a.m. The call-in number is 312-626-6799. And you may contact any member of the Gethsemane Baptist Church for the call-in number and the other numbers that you may need as well. Mother Mary Butler is the church mother. Deacon Johnny Wilson is the chairman of deacons. Brother Cecil Straughter is the pastor. You're cordially invited to worship at the New Oak Grove Baptist Church today. You may join them Facebook Live at 10 o'clock a.m. Deacon Alonzo Jones is the chairman of deacons. Reverend W.W. Wilson is the pastor. The St. Paul Baptist Church, Sylvester Road, Albany, Georgia, invites everyone to their dedication ceremony, which will be held on Sunday, February 27th at 12 o'clock noon. The church is located at 2714 Sylvester Road, Albany, Georgia. Deacon Walter Jinks is the chairman of deacons. Reverend Calvin Rollins is the pastor. You have a cordial invitation to worship with us at the Mount Calvary Baptist Church today. Facebook Live, our worship service begins at 10:30 a.m. and each of you are cordially invited to attend. Mother Evelyn Lewis is the church mother. Deacon Leon Spears, chairman of deacons. Reverend Isaac H. Holmes is the pastor. As always, as we try to do on each Sunday morning, we would like to encourage each of you that have not taken advantage of getting vaccinated to please go out and get vaccinated. If you've gotten one, we ask that you will seriously consider going and following up and taking your other vaccination as well as your booster shots. This is going to be very important as we continue to move through this time of pandemic and the different things that we're experiencing during this time. But we do know, we do hope, and we do pray that each of you will take advantage of the vaccination that's being offered. Again, friends, as you're joining this morning on Facebook Live, we would like to share to you, we're coming to you live from the J.W. Williams Funeral Home this morning because of the cyber attack that has taken place at our local TV station. Again, we do apologize for any inconvenience that this may have caused any of you, but we do thank you for joining us this morning, and we do hope that our program has been an uplifting to each of you this morning. Again, it is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcements. Mrs. Connie Frances Deans Dixon, age 59, of 651 Stevens Street, Rochelle, Georgia, died Wednesday, February 16th at Atrium Madison Health in Macon, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Connie Frances Deans Dixon will be held Sunday, today, February 20th at 1:00 p.m. graveside from the New Travelers Home Church Cemetery in Abbeville, Georgia. Reverend Travis Johnson will officiate. Beloved educator, assistant principal, and CTAE director for the Dooley County School System, Ms. Carolyn Renee Brooks, age 49, of 1611 Oconee Circle, Cordele, Georgia, died Friday, February 18th at the Cancer Treatment Center of America in Newnan, Georgia. The funeral service for beloved educator, Ms. Carolyn Renee Brooks, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mr. J.B. Crowder, age 51, of 217 South Depot Street, Pineview, Georgia, died Friday, February 18th at his residence. The funeral service for Mr. J.B. Crowder will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mr. Henry Lee Sims, Jr., age 47, of 105 Ross Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Saturday, February 19th at the Piedmont Fayetteville Hospital in Fayetteville, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Henry Lee Sims, Jr. will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Ms. Kimberly Shantae Grant Sainin, age 47, of 515 Southeast 9th Street, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, died Thursday, January 27th at her residence. The funeral service for Ms. Kimberly Shantae Grant Sainin will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mr. Alonzo Mitchell Sr. of Cordele, Georgia, died early this morning at his residence. The funeral service for Mr. Alonzo Mitchell Sr., age 66, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors serving Cordele and Vienna are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. And friends, as we prepare to close our program this morning, our program and everything that we've done this morning is dedicated to all of our bereaved families, to those bereaved families whose loved ones were laid to rest during the past week, the family of Mrs. Annie K. Trussell Perry of Tampa, Florida, the family of Deacon Vernon David Conaway of Macon, Georgia, the family of Mr. Francis Singleton, better known as Mike of Warwick, Georgia. We dedicate our program this morning in its entirety as well to all of the bereaved families whose loved ones will be laid to rest during this week. The family of Mrs. Connie Frances Deans Dixon of Rochelle, Georgia, the family of beloved educator, assistant principal, Ms. Carolyn Renee Brooks of Cordele, Georgia, the family of Mr. J.B. Crowder of Pineview, Georgia, the family of Mr. Henry Lee Sims, Jr. of Cordele, Georgia, the family of Ms. Kimberly Shantae Grant Sainin of Tampa, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, the family of Mr. Alonzo Mitchell Sr. of Cordele, Georgia. This program is dedicated to all of our sick and shut-ins, to all of our patients in the local and surrounding hospitals, to all of our retired educators, to all of our ministers and their spouses, to the men and women serving in the armed forces, both stateside and abroad, and to each of you who tune in and watch our program each and every Sunday morning. It is a pleasure for us to bring it to you. Our program this morning is dedicated in loving memory of our past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams. We also this morning dedicate our program to our president, CEO, Deacon Arthur L. Parker, and his wife, Mrs. Calandra Wilkinson Parker, and their son, Jai. And to each of you who are joining us this morning again, we're coming to you live from the J.W. Williams Funeral Home because of the cyber attack that is taking place at our local TV station. We ask that you will continue to be in prayer for us as we continue to move forth. We do hope, we do trust, and we do pray that on next Sunday morning, we'll be able to come back to you to bring to you our program the way that we normally would bring it to you. But we wanted you to know that we are pleased that we're able to share with you in this regard. We pray God's blessings upon each of you as you go about your day today. We pray that He will continue to smile upon you. And until next Sunday morning, we bid each of you a wonderful, safe day.